So on this one, we're going to check out how to select things. So you have so many different objects in Photoshop, and you need to select those to put them onto other layers. It's not hard. There's a lot of ways to do it. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you kind of the multiple ways to do that. Hopefully it isn't too much tutorial and you get a little bit lost, but I'll try to take my time and show you exactly what buttons I would use in what situations. We're going to look at one picture I have here that was taken by a student. It's a really great picture. I like this kid's expression. And in this case, you might want to cut him out and use him for other things, or cut out people in the background, do all sorts of things. So this is just kind of a cool one to work with, I think, for what we're trying to learn today. So again, the first thing I'm always going to do is double my layer. I can also use Control-J for that. And that way I have two layers. I have a background one that I'm going to call original. That way, in case I mess anything up, I can always go back to it, and it's really, really easy to work with. Okay, so when I want to select things, I have a lot of options. One, of course, would just be I can select an area like this. Okay, and it's pretty broad. It's a bold stroke. I can then copy that area if I do Control-J, for instance. Over here, if I go Control-J, you notice it just has that area. It's almost like cropping, but it just selects a rectangle. Doesn't really do much for me in this circumstance, but it could be helpful. You'll notice what you see on there, of course, are those little marching ants on the screen. That's what these little guys along the side are. We call those marching ants. If I do Control-D, it deselects it. I can, of course, also do all kind of different shapes there. So I could do a circle. I could do other kind of rows and columns. This one's really nice, the lasso tool. The lasso tool really helps if you have a firm, kind of a delicate hand, not so much a firm hand, a delicate hand, and you're able to move up the individual, and you're really good at outlining, for instance. You can kind of keep going here. Now notice I had to scroll up, so I let go of my mouse, and it created kind of an area. That's okay. What I can do is I can hold down Shift, and you'll notice there's a little plus on the cursor. That plus allows me to add more, so then I can keep going up. I'm holding down Shift as I hold down left click as well, and then I just slowly go up, and I find his ear. Okay, and then I keep going, and notice it just kind of adds on to that. Again, Shift allows me to add more, and I can keep going on. Okay, and so eventually I could go around his entire person. So at that point, you know, I have effectively made a pretty terrible copy there, or selection. That's what it looks like. That doesn't really help us. But the lasso tool is nice because I'll show you in a second. If you miss some areas, you can get it back with the lasso tool really easily, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, so the next one we have is one of my favorite, which is the quick selection tool. This is nice. If we use our bracket buttons on the keyboard, we can make our cursor a little bit bigger, and it's going to do its best to kind of find edges. So if you have a picture like this where there's a pretty clear foreground and background, it does a pretty good job. Notice it took some desk there, and I can use Alt to click off of that and say, don't select that. Okay, so similarly right there. And it did a really nice job just by going over the person in the foreground. That's great. I can use that for a ton of things. It's really, really nice. Now, let's say, however, let's go back here and imagine that I have this selected. Whoops, too many buttons. Imagine that I have this selected, this area. I'm going to delete this layer. Oops. So I'm going to trash that layer, yes. And now I have it selected still because I saved my selection there. And let's say I want to add that desk in there. Let's say I'm like, gosh, I really want that desk. First of all, I could just use that quick selection tool. And I could get it, and I can add it because it's on plus. If I hold down Alt, though, I can also subtract it. Notice how that works. So when I'm holding down Alt, I can kind of go through and just say, I don't want those areas, actually. I've changed my mind. And it tries to do its best job of finding it. But now if I get to this point, I'm like, it's not really working. What I could do is I could zoom in, and using my lasso tool, I go right back to it, and I say, okay, I want to Alt, so I have the minus on there. So I go Alt, and I'm going to just go with a steady hand, and say I don't want any of that area selected. And notice it just cuts it right out. I can also use Shift and say, well, I want this area selected. So let's add that with Shift. Looks like we have a weird pattern there. There we go. So we have all that, and then I can again go up as chin. So it's nice you can use these together. And there I didn't select enough of it. Back here to say OK. Again, Alt is to minus and say I don't want that. Very good. So it's nice. The lasso tool, the quick selection tool, you can use those in tandem as you work on your image that you want to cut out. So I'm going to go Control D to deselect. And then I can use the magic wand tool. And it's kind of interesting. It tries to select these areas of similar tonality. It's fun. You can get some kind of cool range of colors and situations. I like that little goatee situation. You may or may not use that, but that's up to you. The last one I'm going to show you is really, really neat. It's kind of finicky, I'd say, but it works well, but mostly with non-organic shapes. So like a face isn't always as good, but if you have like, you know, maybe that projector screen up there, let's get rid of that. Let's use the pen tool down here. And what I can do is I can set these marks, and I can say, okay, this is the area. And what's nice is it creates that firm line there. And I could zoom in really tight if I wanted to. And now that I've done that, what I can do is right click and say I want to make a selection out of that. And I want to feather the radius, which means it kind of softens it out a little bit. So I want to feather that like 4 pixels. Okay. And then I've got this nice little selection. And that's kind of nice with that pen tool when it's a non-organic shape. So when it's something geometric, you can really easily select those areas. Then, of course, I could do something like, I could say Edit, Fill, and then I could say I want to fill that with content aware because I just want to get rid of that blackboard, or that screen, excuse me. And that's weird. Of course, it tries to select everything else, and that actually looks magnitudes worse than what it looked like before. So that's kind of fun. That's really creepy, actually. So that was a fail, but a fun fail, nevertheless. So those are different ways that you can select areas, and then of course you can do a whole bunch of stuff with that once you've selected it. You can put color in, you can use that content aware tool to fill it with some information that's around it. You could copy that to multiple layers, you can flip it, you can do all sorts of stuff, but you gotta learn how to select or else you really can't do a lot of the other cool stuff. One of the next videos I'm going to show you is how do you select something and then get like those really fine details. So for instance, if you have hair, how do you get those fine details in the image, in that selection? So that's a really kind of a tough one. We're going to play around with it. Hopefully it goes well. Unfortunately, I'm on a retreat right now, so I'm not at school where I have access to a lot of really good pictures that would help with the hair cutout. But we'll see what we can do while we're here. All right, see you next time.